Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. Thank you so very much for joining me this evening, wherever you are in the world, and I truly hope that you're in incredibly good shape and having a really fabulous day. And if we are, reaching you at night time, I hope you're ready to settle down and enjoy an incredibly good evening. And before we get cozy and comfortable, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. Now, we all know about long-haul truck drivers, and I've just only recently launched one of my truck drivers and his incredible encounters on the road. And he has a friend who's also given an incredible account of his experiences on our North American highways at night. And this guy has been driving a truck for over 30 years, so he's got lots of stories to tell. And believe me, this is only the beginning, so I know you're going to enjoy the story he has for us tonight, which is literally going to knock your socks off. So let's get started. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, I'm writing to you as I was recently encouraged by my trucking friend to do so. I believe he recently shared with you and your listeners his utterly extraordinary accounts of some of the bizarre encounters that he experienced driving on the North American roads in his long-haul truck at those ungodly hours of the night. Like him, I have had some harrowing experiences all of my own whilst driving on our North American highways at the dead of night in the witching hours. I'm eager to share with you and your listeners my incredible stories that border from the incredulous to the bizarre. It does feel good to unload some of my strange encounters with you and your listeners of my outer-worldly phenomenon experiences to try and make some kind of sense out of them. I assure you, my stories are true, regardless of how fictitious they may actually sound. All these years later, meditating on these peculiar out-of-worldly events has left me with more questions than answers concerning the nature of our reality and how things actually do work in this very strange, peculiar world of ours. And I wish that I could have answers for you, but I don't. Before I became a long-haul truck driver, I was a deeply cynical person that would have laughed in your face if you had tried to convince me that spurious cryptid-like creatures like Bigfoot and Dogman were in fact real. I would have believed you to be as nutty as a fruitcake, completely off your rocker, or just plain old barking mad. Now it seems that I am the one with egg on my face. As far as the paranormal and ghostly encounters are concerned, I also believe them not to be credible or reliable, and much more like fabricated, feigned stories designed to give us the heebie-jeebies with no real solid foundation or truth behind them. I was soon to discover how wrong I actually was, and how intrinsically real some of these peculiar things that happen actually are. Believe me, there is stuff that is occurring at the dead of night that would make your blood run cold, if you were unfortunate enough to happen to witness them with your own eyes, like I have. I gather my trucker friend did inform you about the lifestyle of a long-haul truck driver, because believe me, it's not plain sailing as it may appear. It's not a job for the faint-hearted by any means, because believe me, it gets lonely out on those open roads at night, and it is tough being away from your family for a very long period of time. Most of us take the job as fast, easy money being our primary motivation, but easy it most certainly is not. As for the money, it is a journey, because when you first start, the pay's not always great, but with more experience under your belt, you can begin to dictate your price, especially when you get well known in the industry. And I've been truck driving for 30 years, so I've got a name, believe me. It's truly tough out there, and if it weren't undemanding, there would not be so many people leaving the industry as they invariably do, nor would there be such a huge demand for gainful employment in the long-haul trucking industry. As a trucker, you literally eat and sleep on the open road, and you do travel through some spectacularly idyllic countryside that is exquisitely beautiful. But you do not get the prerogative or the privilege to traverse and indulge yourself in exploring this natural, glorious world, because you're quite literally stuck behind the driver's seat. And it is utterly imperative for you to meet your critical delivery windows. I personally have suffered from insomnia my entire life, so driving at night has never been a stumbling block for me, as I guess my biorhythms are completely screwed up. I used to visit sleep clinic after sleep clinic after sleep clinic to investigate my peculiar sleeping dilemma, but now I use my restlessness to my advantage by driving at night, and it works incredibly well for me. Driving at night does reduce visibility on the roads monumentally, because it's dramatically compounded when you're dealing with treacherous wintry conditions on the roads, especially fog, hail, rain, sleet, snow and ice. However, there is one huge advantage, which is a game changer as far as I'm concerned, and that is traffic congestion. It literally becomes extinct, and so you can get so many more hours under your belt in a lot less time without stressing yourself out in the process due to obstacles in the road, hold-ups and difficult people, and that is a huge deal to me. So you're probably wondering what I've actually seen on those open roads at night, and believe me, I've seen it all. I've seen Bigfoots, dogmans, and I've seen very odd, peculiar behaved human beings. I've also seen ghosts, apparitions, and UFOs. Yes, I've seen pretty much everything out there. So let me share a few of my astonishing stories with you that I know will blow your socks off. One night I was driving out on the open road. I think it was about 1 o'clock. I was listening to Reba McEntire, my all-time favourite country singer. I simply adore her. I was listening to her song, If You See Him, and I was singing the song with her and literally banging my hand in time to the music on my steering wheel, something that I'm prone to doing when I'm enjoying the music. Quite suddenly, out of the blue, I saw a white Mitsubishi car come flying out of nowhere, and it literally went rolling, somersaulting and pirouetting in circles, only yards away from my truck. I could hardly believe what I was actually witnessing, and it was happening so quickly. I immediately braked, only feet away from the horrifying collision. I watched the car ploughing through the guardrail, where luckily it suddenly just stopped, precariously hanging over the embankment. Thankfully, it did not go rolling down the vast grassy ridge. However, the forceful impact literally thrust, crumpled and buckled about 2 feet of the metal bonnet inwards, spawning the windshield to implode violently and spraying the inside of the car with deadly slivers of glass. I could see that both the steering wheel and the dashboard were mangled and obliterated in a massive mess, and the person behind the steering wheel seemed to be in a very critical condition and maybe even deceased. I could smell that disgusting lingering scent of smoke and see the dark, ominous smoky fumes filling the car. And even in my truck, I literally could taste that oily residue in my mouth. I knew I had only seconds to literally save this person's life, if they indeed could be saved. Judging by the state of the car, it was exceedingly doubtful. Suddenly, before I even opened my truck door, out of the dark shadows of the night, like a shining knight in shining armour, and rising up from the grassy embankment and stepping seamlessly over the guardrail, was this colossal blue-grey giant, covered in shaggy hair from head to toe, that stood on 2 feet. He was easily over 1,000 pounds and 10 to 11 foot tall. This imposing creature was quite literally humongous in his stature, girth, strength and grace. Never before in my entire life had I ever witnessed such a majestic, magnificent, lofty and powerful creature. In that moment, I realised that this creature was definitely a Bigfoot, and I sat back in my truck, transfixed, spellbound and astounded by what I was actually seeing. This incredible Bigfoot was trying to rescue the dying man in his car. I watched him make light work of the mangled wreck of the car and stabilising it. The car looked literally like a kid's toy in his Goliath-like arms and sausage-sized fingers. He steered the car away from the guardrail, propelling it forwards with his humongous arms. He pulled the buckled car door off its hinges with one huge thrust and with effortless ease. Something that you would have to do with the jaws of life in normal situations. The defunct man lay limp in the road, and the jumbo-sized humanoid ape tried to revive him by shaking him a little and slapping his face, but the man did not respond to his valiant efforts. It was clear that the man had died on impact. Suddenly the disheartened, hairy humanoid looked up at me. I think he could detect and actually feel my stares. He knew I had been watching him. In that moment our eyes met, and I sensed his disappointment and dismay in the creature's gaze. It was like in that moment we were both united in the depredation of this terrible tragedy that had unfolded before our eyes, and we were both sharing in our grief for this senseless, tragic loss. I immediately phoned 911 and reported the accident, giving them all my information should they require any further details. I didn't want to stay around because I could see the telltale flickers of yellow flames, and I knew that within seconds that car would burst and explode into a fiery inferno, and I didn't want to be around for that. I watched the Bigfoot gliding down the embankment with incredible grace and majesty, and then I manoeuvred my truck out of the area as fast as was conceivably possible. I remember my heart was thumping violently in my chest, and I became overwhelmed with turbulent, tempestuous emotions. I was thinking of that poor man's family and how it was that he had managed to crash his car so destructively, ending in such tragic consequences. I immediately pulled my pickup to the side of the road to gather my composure and to take stock of things and to get some deep breaths into my lungs. Suddenly I realized I was not alone, and imagine my surprise when I recognized the ghostly form sitting next to me in my truck. I was too amazed to be afraid, because I knew that this man sitting next to me was a deceased man that I had just seen lying dead on the road only moments before. The man looked befuddled and unhinged, but he was definitely a ghost, because he had a translucency about him that is the only way I can describe it. I knew he needed my help, so I said to him, "Look, buddy, I do not know your name, but you have just had a catastrophe. You've had a dreadful car accident, and you died on impact. It must be hard to deal with, I know, but you are actually dead. So my advice to you is to look for the light and move towards it. You must embrace the next step of your adventure. I have heard that it is a better place than this one is." The man's expression visibly changed, and he looked at his translucent arms for a moment, as if it had suddenly hit him like a ton of bricks, that he was actually dead. I then heard this energetic whooshing suction sound, and he was gone out of my truck, just like that, never to be seen again. I want to tell you that this whole experience changed my life in an instant, making me realize that we simply do not die, and that energy always lives on. I also realized that Bigfoot was indeed a real flesh and blood being that is remarkably intelligent, perceptive, intuitive, and very, very clever. And that was a divulgence that was hard for me to come to terms with. Another strange experience I had while trucking was at about 2 a.m. in the morning. I began to see this emaciated, atrophied figure of a man hobbling across the road. He was wearing a hospital gown, and he was so stick-thin it was almost impossible to believe that in his wasted state that he actually had the capacity to walk. His eyes were like sunken bony hollows, and his face looked like yellow leather. I immediately braked my truck and asked the man if he needed a lift. I thought he might be someone who'd lost his mental faculties and had wandered away from an old age home, forgetting who or where he was, because believe me, I've seen that before. He nodded his head and followed me to the truck, and seemingly bounced on the seat with a degree of agility that surprised me. "Can I phone someone for you?" I asked, "and let them know where you are? I'm sure your family is very worried about you. It's very late. They must be deeply concerned." The man chuckled as if he found my words amusing. "You can give me a lift if you don't mind," he said. "Of course," I said, surprised that he seemed so lucid and coherent. "I've been a very sick man for a long time," he told me. "I buggered up my liver drinking too much moonshine. The doctor could do nothing for me apart from waiting on my liver transplant, but that was never going to happen. Not for an old codger like me, anyway. They don't have much sympathy for drunks." "So you decided to up and leave the hospital just like that?" I said, looking at him aghast. "That's a very silly thing to do. You could get yourself into serious trouble. You're not a well man." "I ought to take you back right now," I said. "I did notice you were wearing a hospital gown. Which hospital did you come from?" The old man chuckled. "Not so fast," he said. "I'll give you directions myself." I followed the man's directions diligently, and before I knew it, my truck was parked literally outside a cemetery. I could hardly believe it. "Is this some kind of a sick joke?" I asked the man. The man gave me a grin. "I'm at home," he said. "Right over there at plot number 578. I watched the man get out of my truck and wobble precariously on his frail legs towards the graveyard, and then he dematerialized before my eyes. I put a note on plot number 578, which I taped down with the duct tape, asking the grievers of this plot to give me a call, because I knew that I had just seen this man's ghost. A few days later, I got a phone call from the daughter, who told me that her father had indeed died of liver disease in hospital 5 days earlier, and she sent me a photograph of him on her mobile phone. Imagine my shock and horror when I saw it was the man I had picked up in my truck. Only in this picture, he looked remarkably more healthy. I was utterly amazed. I mean, how does this sort of thing ever happen, I wondered. I've also had many other terrifying encounters on those North American roads. One that springs to mind happened in the early hours of the morning at about 3 p.m. on one of our highways. I remember seeing 3 a.m. on one of our highways. I remember seeing what appeared to be a pile of coal-black clothes lying in the middle of the road. I immediately stopped my truck. You see, I sensed something felt incredibly off, and I knew something was not quite right. I also definitely felt evil in the air. The clothes appeared to be smoking, and I could physically see the vapour spiralling out of the material like a white cigarette smoke. The clothes started to whirl and spin in a triangular shape like a spinning wheel, and then the smoky form began to slowly morph into the shape of a hideous, decrepit, sinister, deformed-looking old hag with these massive, bulging eyes that were practically bursting out of their sockets as she glared and glowered at me with this horrifying, evil stare that physically caused my body to become overwhelmed with an insidious terror. This hag was beyond evil. I do not believe I have ever been so petrified in my entire life. I let out a shrill scream, and I pressed down my accelerator and proceeded to spur my truck down the highway as fast as I possibly could. But as I glanced at my side window, the ugly old hag was glaring at me with her milky eyes, and all the while making these horrifying wailing sounds, and she was scratching the side of my truck with her long talons. I could hear her literally scraping it. I kept driving, seeing her gnarled, distorted, shadowy dark form in my peripheral vision. She literally floated on the side of my truck for a good 15 minutes, all the while making these god-awful shrieks and hissing sounds. I've never seen such a grotesque, ugly, mangled, freakish-looking old hag in my entire life, and hope to never see her again. Suddenly I saw what looked like a large piece of black material blowing in the wind, and then descending towards the middle of the road. I could see the ominous smoky vapour rising from the black material all over again, and I just did not wait. I literally hightailed my truck out of the area as fast as I possibly could, hardly daring to believe what I'd actually seen. I can assure you that the menacing, hag-like woman was exceedingly evil. I was in no doubt about that. I assure you that the side of my truck was seriously damaged, with long scratch marks done in threes. Another thing that was also decidedly odd was that after my encounter with that hideous, vile hag, my mattress in my truck was literally moving and twisting and shaking, and I pulled back the covers to find hundreds of snakes wiggling around my bed sheets, and I'm talking about hundreds of them. I am in no doubt that the hideous hag had something to do with putting them there, but as I'm terrified of snakes, I got someone else to get rid of them. I was told that some of them were deadly. I have experienced other crazy encounters on the roads because I've been driving a long-haul truck for over 30 long years now. I hope your listeners enjoyed my story. Well, thank you so much for that absolutely fantastic story. I mean, it's just incredible what kind of encounters happen out there, and we so enjoyed it, and we look forward to hearing more of your amazing encounters. Until next time, goodbye and good night.